I'm coming all the way from Sweetgrass First Nation. I currently reside in Saskatoon with my wife and 2 children. And I'm here today to share 4 key pillars to help you to keep moving forward, regardless of what life puts in front of you. The 4 key pillars that I'm going to share with you today come from before my time. They're passed down from generation to generation from my ancestors and translated over time into English. I'm an Oskapios back home. That means I'm a helper in our ceremonies with the elders back home. And when I sit beside them, many things are discussed through storytelling. And so today, many of the teachings I'm going to leave with you today are done the same way, through stories. Before I get into the 4 key pillars, I want to share with you something, a word that oftentimes comes in a time of hardship back home. It's a word called aiman. And the elders say aiman. That means it's hard, it's difficult. And oftentimes, as individuals, as pharmacists, we go through difficult times. It's inevitable. Every human being has to go through obstacles, challenges to become who they're meant to become. But oftentimes when we're children, when we're young people, we're not told that. And then we get into the mainstream. We go on to get our schooling, post-secondary, our certifications. It's difficult. And then we come and we're leading the way through the pandemic. More responsibility is put upon us. And little by little, more things are added to our plate. I'll tell you, during that time, I saw many of us in this room rise and become the leaders and the faces of saving our country during that time. As a child, I remember going through with my family into the mainstream, going from the reserve to the cities. And oftentimes we went through a lot of hardships during that time. I'm going to peel back and go back to a story here to help bring this up to speed here. As I'm sharing this story, I want you to think about every single thing you've had to go through to be in this room. But also, I want you to think about where you want to go after we leave these doors here today. Everyone has a story. Everyone has obstacles. Everyone has something special within themselves. And if there's something that I can leave with you today, I want you to share this with you right now, that everyone in this room, it's not a coincidence that you and I are here today. As a kid, I grew up with my 4 siblings. I'm the eldest in my family. I have my mother. I'm very grateful that she's still with us to this day. And my mother did the best she could with what she had. Prior to my generations, I'm going to take you back as far as I can. As I'm sharing this, I want you to think of every single person that sacrificed for you to be in this room with us today. Everyone that allowed you to become the leaders in your community, your city, your town. As far back as I can remember, as I was told, my great-grandfather went through a difficult time. Back home in Treaty 6 territory, there was a lot of things that happened that were obstacles amongst First Nations people back home. I'm Nahio, that's what we call ourselves, Plains Cree, Y dialect back home in Treaty 6 territory in Sweetgrass. And my great-grandfather went through a difficult time of change in our country. Through the 1800s, he was born. He had to leave his home community in Saskatchewan, his home reserve, because there was a rebellion happening. Many of my Indigenous relatives were being massacred back home. There was a lot of conflict. And we were put onto reserves where we were told that's where we were going to live, segregated from society. And when you're put on a reserve, not giving the same opportunities as everyone else in the country, it's hard to be hopeful. It's hard to think optimistically. We couldn't get education. We couldn't start companies. I couldn't have a voice like I do here today. So I take it with great responsibility that I'm representing a lot of people before my time. And I really believe that you and I in this moment, there's a reason that we're going to be leaving with something here today to help change this world, because all of us are change makers. We may not feel it during our toughest times, but I will tell you, it's not a coincidence that you're in your field, saving lives, helping people out there. We don't know what people are going through when they come to that counter looking to you for advice, for wisdom, but they come to you. They see you as a leader. And sometimes we forget our why through the most difficult times in our journey. My great-grandfather, during that time, had to flee down to the U.S., Montana Bend. That's where he was born, raised, early upbringing. Slowly, when it was safe, he came back to Sweetgrass, where he was raising a family with my great-grandmother. My grandmother, in our language, we call her Kukam. My Kukam was someone who also helped raise me, and she was born from my great-grandfather, living in Sweetgrass. During the time of the early 1900s, she also saw a lot of the things where many indigenous children were being carried off through cattle wagons to residential schools. She watched all that happen, watched a lot of her family, her friends, getting carried off, not to be seen for a long time. She saw the effects of that in our society. And then she had my mother. My mother's name is Inez. And my mother's name, Inez, she was the one who did the best she could with what she had right in front of her. My mother met my dad. Had me, Kendra, Farah, Marisha. And when we were children, my earliest memories were about 3 years old. I want you to think about your earliest memories as a child, because it's helped shape who you are today, how we handle pressure, how we handle obstacles. And if we are struggling right now, and we're having a hard time overcoming something in our personal life and in our career, sometimes there's just something that we don't know yet that will help create a ripple effect. And it starts with what we put into our mind. My earliest memories as a child was a lot of the things, unfortunately, that my brothers and sisters still go through to this day. Watching alcoholism, living on welfare checks, having no hope, living on the res. Watching domestic violence happening in community. A lot of different things were happening, still happening to this day. My mother said one day, that's enough. She took us from that home, and off we went. We had no place to go, leaving my dad's home in a northern Saskatchewan reserve. And when we left there, we had no place to go. We ended up in these women's shelters, interval houses, where single mothers had no place to go with their children. And when we were living there, I used to wonder as a child, when are we going home? Where's Dad? I miss my dad. I want to go home. 0 to 6 years of age, crucial time for a child's development. A lot of the things that happen in the future can be rooted back to these years. So that's why it's very important that we do self-reflecting on how we grew up, because it creates habits, and those habits compound into physical realities, the present and the future. And sometimes we have to go back and heal our past. We have to talk it out. We have to seek counsel, therapy, talk to our loved ones, elders, and so on. Collectively, as colleagues, sharing stories to help uplift each other. Because when you're alone and you're behind that counter and you're working with people every single day, we don't know what you're going through. You could be going through the most challenging times in your life right now, and the person beside you and the person on the other side of that counter wouldn't know it. That's why it's important to gather like we are doing here today. It's called miyo-wîcêhtowin, helping each other, supporting each other, regardless of how difficult life gets in our path.